Number 5 on this list is the Falling Boy. This is a sad legend that's probably true. The Black Church is located in the Romanian city of Brasov and is a beautiful old Gothic church. It almost never made it to 2022 though, because several hundred years ago it had a horrible fire. The church did manage to survive and had a bunch of renovations done on it to spruce it up. It's around this period of time that people think the Falling Boy statue was erected. On one single pillar of the exterior of the church, there's a statue of a boy who looks to be falling over. Either that or he's searching for something on the ground. It's difficult to say for sure. Either way, no one has any idea why this statue is here, and 3 legends have come out explaining it. Arena Webb writes, some say that he was the son of a priest and that he was naughty. As a punishment, his father sent him in the church's attic. But then the Great Fire started and so the boy got trapped in there. The statue was built depicting him trying to escape the flames. Another legend, and a more popular one, is that the boy was helping with the construction of the church. At one point, his boss told him to check if the wall is straight. He leaned over the walls and he fell. His boss felt guilty and ordered a statue. Others, though, say it was murder. They say that this boy was so good working at the construction of the church that a fellow worker got envious. He sent the boy to check the walls and he pushed him. The boy died, but the man couldn't live with the guilt, so he confessed shortly after. The other builders decided to make the statue in the boy's memory. So those are the 3 legends about the boy, and sadly all of them result in the boy's death. Now it's thought that his spirit still lingers here at this church, and if you're lucky, you may even be able to spot him. Comment down below what you guys think about this legend and which of the 3 stories you believe the most. Curious to know what you guys got. Number 4 on this list is the Pied Piper. You've most likely heard the name and probably the story of the Pied Piper before. If you haven't, then let me read off a great passage from Andre Diamond describing the tale. The Pied Piper legend originated in Hamelin, Germany during the Middle Ages. As the story goes, the town was struggling with a rat infestation problem and was desperate for relief. A mysterious man in pied clothing approached the mayor and promised he could rid the city of its problem in return for payment of 1,000 guilders. The mayor agreed, and the man played a magical pipe to lure all the city's rats to a nearby body of water where they drowned. When the piper returned for his reward, the mayor refused. As if visualizing a rat infestation was not traumatizing enough, the story then takes another sinister turn. Furious that he had been cheated, the piper soon returned to the town of Hamelin on St. John's and Paul's Day. As the grown members of the town attend church, the piper once again played his magical pipe through the streets, this time luring the town's 130 children from their homes. Depending on the version of the story, he either led them to the lake or into a cave, and none were ever seen again. Most versions agree there were a few children left behind. One was crippled and he could not keep up, one was deaf so he could not hear the music, and one was blind and could not see where the other children were going. When church let out, the survivors told the townspeople what had happened, and the rest is history. Now you're probably thinking, okay Nick, well what the hell does this have to do with Romania? Well, there's another version of this legend that says this man took the into Vagas Cave and then after a time slowly let them out. Vagas Cave is in Transylvania, and it's believed by the locals that this Pied Piper still lives there. They also think that this is the true version of the legend because there's a very large population of German-speaking Saxons in that area. These people are thought to be the descendants of the children who were taken so many years ago. Even to this day though, everyone still fears Vagas Cave and still fears the Piper. Number 3 on this list is the Sacrificial Lakes. Most of the time when somebody enters a body of water, they're worried about becoming food to the fish that live in the said. Most of the time when someone enters a body of water, they're worried about becoming food to the fish that live in said body of water. What they usually aren't as concerned with is becoming food to the actual water itself. That's exactly what some people in Romania believe in regards to some of their bigger lakes though. Lake Vinderel, for instance, is known to some locals as a lake which will actually swallow people up. Even the most skilled swimmers who go here will drown and never be heard from again. Most of the time these bodies are never found, but there's a legend that says a piece of bloody flesh floats on top of the water at all times. Lake Vinderel is one of the most famous, but it isn't the only lake in Romania that has some dark lore around it. One lake literally swallowed up an entire town when a slope collapsed and forced the homes along with a church inside the water. People around that area often hear the ringing of church bells as they pass by the lake, thinking that the spirits of those who died in this tragedy still haunt the area. Because of all this death in these Romanian lakes, it's now believed that sacrifices must be made to keep the water at bay. Yep, that's right guys, what better way to stop people from dying in the lakes than to have people specifically die from the lakes? That's the train of thought, and it's most prevalent in the Maramureș region of Romania amongst the elderly folk who live there. They think that the only way to calm the dark spirits who clearly inhabit these waters is to occasionally offer a human sacrifice. Now I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't able to find exact details on who has been sacrificed or when, but I imagine that this has taken place at least once in Romania's history if there's an entire legend around it. I also find it kind of interesting that the Romanians don't have a particular demon or creature in mind who could be behind this. As of right now, it's just thought that there's a dangerous entity in the lake water and that sacrificing a human should relax that entity at least for a little while. Either way, if you're going to go swimming in Romania, then stay away from the lakes. Number 2 on this list is the World War II ghosts. There's a town called Akamanto, and in that town there's a very specific mansion with some very interesting lore surrounding it. That mansion is called the Teleki Mansion. This mansion is really interesting because it didn't actually see much fighting at all, but is currently haunted with ghosts from World War II. The ghosts of these World War II soldiers who haunt this place sadly caused their tragic fate themselves. One evening, the soldiers went into the mansion and decided to enjoy a little bit too much wine. The mansion had cellars full of nice quality bottles, and the soldiers definitely overindulged. In fact, they got so hammered that they decided to start firing off their guns in the basement before passing out. They passed out in the cellar, and it's said that from the guns that they shot off, the wine started filling up the room. They were far too gone to notice and actually drowned in said wine. Now these soldiers haunt the mansion and locals see them regularly. In fact, some blurry photos were taken back in 2011 of these ghosts in the place. Dying is obviously worst case scenario and never what anyone wants, but I guess the one thing that you can say for these guys is that they probably died at least happy. Number 1 on this list is the Nymphs of Slavina Cave. Deep in the mountains of Transylvania, through a long road of rivers and beautiful scenery, sits a forgotten cave called the Slavina Cave. This cave is full of crazy stuff from the past and has been a really important find for archaeologists studying Romanian history. Tombs, treasures, skeletal remains, and most important, potential evidence of nymphs are all found in this mysterious cavern. In case you aren't familiar with what a nymph is, then Britannica tells us that they were usually associated with fertile, growing things such as trees or with water. They were not immortal but were extremely long-lived and were on the whole kindly disposed toward men. These were women in Greek mythology who were considered divinities. It's believed that this cave may have once been the home to some of them. The treasure that's been found here, some of the inscriptions that are on the wall, the overall environment outside the cave, all of it fits the bill when it comes to a nymph. At the very least, if a nymph or a group of nymphs hadn't have lived here, then people definitely think this would have been a site of worship for them. Animal carcasses were found here as well, and it's believed that they would have been used for some sacrificial rituals to such higher beings. Now this cave is researched extensively, and locals think that it might possess some mysterious powers. Also, that the rivers that run around this area are rich with minerals and other healing properties. I suppose this urban legend isn't super scary, but honestly kinda cool. Then again, nymphs have been known to be dangerous in the past, so if there was one lurking around this cave still, you wouldn't want to get on its bad side.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Werewolf of Defiance. During the summer of 1972, the people of Defiance claimed they were being terrorized by a werewolf. On July 25th, 1972, Ted Davis, a railroad worker, noticed something strange. He saw 2 hairy, huge paws on the ground in front of him. Confused and likely scared, he slowly raised his eyes and saw before him a creature at least 6 feet tall, hunched over and holding a large wooden board. Before Ted had a moment to react, he hit Ted on the shoulder and ran away. Just a few days after, Ted and his colleagues spotted the return of the unknown creature, and again in the next following day there was another report. A panic began to spur through the town and newspapers about the strange sightings. With all the sightings, it was agreed that the werewolf was large and humanoid. There were enough reports that the Defiance, Ohio Police Department had to open an investigation into werewolves in the area. It is even reported in the various newspapers in Ohio. Eventually, after days of looking with no result, the case was closed. Many people thought it was a prank, but during this experience, people were actually afraid that there were either a creature or some individual dressing up and attacking people. The sightings always happened at night, generally by the train tracks. A couple of women said it would try to get into their houses by rattling the doorknobs. The animal was said to be huge, hairy, and dressed in rags. In at number 4 we have Moonville Tunnel. Located in southern Ohio, these haunted tunnels were once used for multiple railroads. The abandoned coal mining town of Moonville near southeastern Ohio was founded in 1856. At its peak, the town was home to about 100 miners and their families. Little remains of the abandoned coal mining town of Moonville except for a few foundations, a nearby cemetery, and an old railroad tunnel. Due to deterioration, the majority of the tunnels were abandoned, with some filled in for safety reasons. Now only a few remain open, one of which is famously known for being haunted. The railroads were the only route to Moonville, but throughout the years many people have died near the tunnel and train tracks. This is due to the fact that the tunnels were so narrow it was not possible for pedestrians to walk alongside the tracks in the tunnel while a train was passing through, which resulted in numerous fatalities. It is said that the Moonville Tunnel is haunted by ghosts of locals who died from being struck by passing trains. Legend has it the ghost of a man who was killed instantly by a train passing through the tunnel wanders along the track bed near the old tunnel at night. One of the most famous deaths at the tunnel comes from a brakeman worker. Around 1859, a brakeman for the railway fell asleep, and sometime during the night he was awakened by the sound of his train leaving the depot. He arose, stumbling onto the train track and falling beneath the wheels of the train. The brakeman never recovered from his injuries, and the ghost of the man is said to be stumbling down the tracks within the tunnel with a lantern in hand, still trying to catch the train before it leaves Moonville Station. This is why most who claim to have sighted the ghost of Moonville Tunnel say that he carries a lantern and is sometimes seen as a hovering orb of light. In at number 3 we have Melon Heads. Melon Heads is the name given to the urban legend of human-like beings that live in the forests of Michigan, Connecticut, and Ohio. The Melon Heads were originally abandoned children that a scientist by the name of Dr. Crow decided to take care of at his facility in Kirtland, Ohio. While the children stayed at the facility, Dr. Crow performed experiments. What got them the name Melon Heads was when Dr. Crow injected chemicals into their brains, which caused their craniums to grow abnormally large. Because of the abnormal growth, they developed hydrocephalus, which caused them to become mentally ill. After years of neglect, the Melon Heads ended Dr. Crow's life and burned down his facility. After the death of the mad scientist Dr. Crow, the Melon Heads decided to inhabit the forests of Crybaby Bridge. To survive, the Melon Heads feast on any animals that they hunted down. Because of their paranoia of society, the Melon Heads ate anyone that spotted them. To keep the Melon Heads cult going, they've kept inbreeding, making the offspring even more raving and paranoid. Legend holds that the Melon Heads reside in Wisner Road in Kirtland and Chardon Township, with locals and bypassers reported seeing and hearing the Melon Heads as they lurk in the forest looking for their next victim. Local lore depicts them as a territorial and angry, responsible for attacks, kidnappings, and theft of pets and livestock for food. An explorer even wrote a book about the first person encounter with Melon Head. Kelly Topradosian claims that she was exploring the grounds of the then abandoned Felt Mansion and her friends one night when she saw a small human in the distance. They had an unusually large head, but she wasn't scared. Then he started walking towards them. In at number 2 we have Myrtle Hill Cemetery. Residing in Cleveland, Ohio, the Myrtle Hill Cemetery is one mysterious and scary resting place. This legend starts with a 3-foot round granite memorial that pays homage to a witch by the name of Stoskopf. Local legends explain that old lady Stoskopf murdered her family and tossed them in a well. When the townsfolk discovered the grisly truth, they sentenced her to death. When she was buried standing up, and a massive gravestone was placed above her to weigh her spirit down. Though Though that being said, the legend was likely inspired by the real-life slayings carried out by Martha Wise. Martha poisoned her family's water supply and ultimately killed 3 family members, only a mere mile away from where the Witch's Ball stands today. Early on, Wise claimed the devil made her do it, with the Plain Dealer reporting more than 125 witnesses were called to testify to Wise's insanity, stating that sometimes she barked like a dog and frothed at the mouth, that she wandered the woods at night and caught several barns on fire. Wise served most of the rest of her life in Marysville Reformatory, where she died at 89 in 1971. Although she's buried in Marysville, her victims are all buried within a couple of hundred feet of the Stoskopf spherical monument, which wasn't installed, according to local residents, until at least the early 1940s. Locals say that if you touch the stone at night and it's warm, it means that the witch has escaped and she's on the hunt for her next victim. Many can't help but believe that the cemetery itself is haunted, and out of curiosity, many people visit the cemetery and trespass at night to try to interact with its residents' spirits. And finally, in at number 1, we have Rogue's Hollow. From the tales of a haunted mill and a cryberry bridge to a shaking graveyard and a headless horseman, Rogue's Hollow is known to be one of Ohio's most haunted areas. You can explore the park today, just be sure to stay away after dark, as that's when the ghosts come out to play. Ohio Rogue's Hollow was once a populated mining village, but very few remnants of the coal mining town remain now. The town was actually once a place notorious for outlaws and gangsters to hide out. Shootouts and robberies were common here, and these continued until the early 20th century. In spite of the town's crooked reality and a peculiar tale, creepy things continue to happen here. There have been multiple reports of sounds of a crying baby at night, shaking grounds at a graveyard, and ghost sightings that haunt the abandoned town. The abandoned mines around Rogue's Hollow are full of ghosts of miners who perished there in cave-ins and accidents, with reports of tools being picked up by unseen hands in the black shafts chipping away at veins of coal. Though the entrance to the mine has been permanently blocked, and the walkway near the mine shafts are equally plagued by residents of the spirit world. One old legend that haunts the town is of the Chidester Mill ghost. The ghost was believed to belong to a mill worker who fell into the wheel and was crushed beneath the churning waves. The ghost guarded the area and is filled with jealousy and spite. Because of the negative energy this ghost brings, he supposedly started a fire in the Chidester house when an outsider expressed interest in purchasing it. A more modern legend is the Crybaby Bridge. At the bottom of the hollow, a bridge crosses Silver Creek. According to legend, a car traveling across the bridge slid on ice and plunged into the creek. Its occupants were no longer alive. Today, you can hear the cries being heard from the surrounding woods. There are an endless amount of ghost stories circulating about the old mining town of Rogue's Hollow, with eyewitnesses reported seeing women in frontier dresses, hearing old trains, crying and floating tools, leaving us even more certain in the belief of ghosts and spirits. Coming in at number 5, we have Spriggan of West Penwith. The Spriggan is an urban legend known from Cornish fairy lore, where they are mostly located in West Penwith, Cornwall. They are closely related to pixies, but known to be dangerous and mischievous, whereas pixies are more cheerful and fun-loving, while Spriggans are more spiteful, especially directed at humans in the form of evil tricks. Spriggans are said to be the security force behind the fairy world. Unlike some fairies which serve to treat or trick humans, the Spriggans are said to measure out justice to humans who have unduly crossed fairies. They would dole out punishments both big and small to anyone who dared mess too much with the other world. Spriggans were depicted as grotesquely ugly and generally acting as fairy bodyguards. Though usually small, they have the ability to grow to enormous size as a defensive ability. Their strange and creepy appearance also aided the Spriggans in their aim to be feared by those who saw them. It was believed that the Spriggans haunt lonely places such as castle ruins, burrows, certain standing stones, and windswept crags. Spriggans were thought to be the source of such misfortunes as unhealthy crops, bad weather, and illness, especially in a time when the mechanics of such things were not fully understood. They were also said to be busy thieves targeting those who offended them. They are known to steal small children and replace them with their own kind, leaving behind one of their own ugly large-headed children. Quote, one of their common traits was to lead lonely travelers into swamps or near dangerous and crumbling cliffs, a factor they share in common with the will-o'-the-wisp and the pixies, although the pixies would not lead people to dangerous places. If you want to avoid being punished by the Spriggans, the easiest thing you can do is make sure not to offend any type of fairy folk in any way. The second thing you can do, avoid tempting them. Even if you haven't initially done something to offend their fairy folk, the Spriggans may still be tempted to enact a little pre-revenge, just in case you were to wrong the fairy folk. stroke. In at number 4 we have the Pendle Witches. Pendle Hill was once the home of wolves and wild boar. It is also the location of Britain's biggest witchcraft trial that took place over 400 years ago. The Pendle Witches lived in the early 1600s at a time of religion and superstition. Catholics and those suspected of witchcraft came under more scrutiny than ever during this time, and the king brought in the fatal penalty for those found guilty of witchcraft. The 12 Pendle Witches, all local women, while 6 of the Pendle Witches came from one of 2 families, were charged with the murders of 10 people by the use of witchcraft. Perhaps the most notorious witch trial of the 17th century, the legend of the Pendle Witches is one of the many dark tales of imprisonment and execution at Lancaster Castle. 1 woman died while held in custody, 11 went to trial, 1 was tried and found guilty at York, and the other 10 were tried at Lancaster. Only 1 was found not guilty. The story began with an altercation between one of the accused, Alison Device, and a peddler John Law. Alison, either travelling or begging on the road to Trawden Forest, passed John Law and asked him for some pins. He refused and Alison cursed him. It was a short while after this that John Law suffered a stroke, for which he blamed Alison and her powers. The deaths of the 4 other villagers that had occurred years before the trial were raised and the blame laid on the witchcraft performed by another suspected witch in the area. Coming in at number 3 we have Catchy. The Catchy is known to be a ghost-like cat covered in all black fur, besides a small white spot on its chest. This creature haunts the Scottish Highlands. The size of the Catchy is said to be close to the size of a large dog. One of the theories about the Catchy suggests that they aren't fairies but are actually witches that have the ability to transform back and forth between human forms and cat form. This, however, could only be done 9 times, with the final transformation into the cat being permanent. This is often referenced as the origin for the concept of cats having 9 lives. Those in the Highlands did not trust the Catchy because they believed that these creatures are soul thieves. The common belief was that the Catchy could pass over the corpse of the dead prior to burial and steal the soul from someone before the gods had claimed it. Special watches were set up to guard the dead, known as Fail Fadalak, which means late wake. Those on this watch would attempt to keep the Catchy away from the room containing the corpse by distracting it in a variety of methods, such as using catnip, riddles, games, and music. The Catchy was believed to be fond of warmth, and therefore fires were never lit near the body so that they were not attracted to the area. The Catchy was feared due to the belief that it was a harbinger of death, much like the Grim Reaper. Although mostly a silent hunter, the Catchy would sometimes let out 3 blood-curdling howls that could be heard from miles around. Those that heard the howls would need to reach a place of safety before the 3rd howl, or they would be overcome with fear and would die from sheer terror. Coming in at number 2 we have Black Dog of Bunting Nook. Don't be fooled, this isn't just an ordinary suburban dog. The Black Dog of Burning Nook has been described to have dark black fur, snarling fangs, black eyes, and great in size. Spotted by numerous residents and several police officers over the years, the creature has also been reported as extremely large, with huge devilish saucer-like eyes. The creature haunts the road in Bunting Nook, Naunton, according to local legend, as the huge black dog is known to appear in an instant in front of people's cars. From there it targets men, as the dog makes the car stall before preying on the passenger. The black dog legends are often seen as an omen, warning of the imminent death of the person who sees it, or of a close family member, and some folklorists hold that the creatures patrol ley lines, sources of mysterious energy that threads around the world. But Sheffield is not the only part of Yorkshire to have had sightings of the mysterious creature, but true or fake, the demon dog is one of Sheffield's scariest apparitions. According to reports though, it hasn't been seen since 2007, so you might be safe from this one. Or not, or you could die tomorrow. We could all die tomorrow. And finally, in at number 1, we have Hairy Hands of Dartmoor. The Hairy Hands of Dartmoor is a ghost story that focuses on a stretch of road which supposedly had a high number of accidents during the early 20th century. The suggested cause for the loss of control of these vehicles was given to be supernatural activity interfering with the vehicles. According to the stories, the hands appear suddenly, seize the steering wheel of a car or the handlebars of a motorcycle, and then force the victim off the road. In these early cases, the hands are described as being invisible. To further back up this claim, since around 1910, drivers and cyclists had allegedly been reporting unusual accidents, the victims reporting that their vehicle had swerved violently and steered off the side of the road. Some described that it was as if something had wrenched the vehicle out of their control. This could happen to cars, motor coaches, cyclists, and even pony and traps. In June of 1921, Dr. E.H. Helby, who was at the time serving as the medical officer nearby, lost control of his motorcycle and sidecar. In the sidecar was seated his 2 children who survived. He had just about enough time to warn the children to jump before he was thrown from his bike and met his final fate. His children related that as he shouted at them to get to safety, he was fighting against an invisible force in his efforts to control the bike. On August 26th of the same year, a British Army captain lost control of his motorcycle and was thrown off as well. He was known to be a very experienced rider. In response to questioning him, the captain stated that it was not his fault, and believe it or not, something drove him off the road. A pair of hairy hands closed over his. He apparently felt them as plainly as ever. He fought them for all he was worth, but they were too strong for him. They forced the machine into the turf at the edge of the road. Further proof of the hands can be found in Michael Williams' 2003 book Supernatural Dartmoor, where the author was told by journalist Rufus Endell that he was driving near Postbridge when a pair of hands gripped the driving wheel and he had to fight for control. When he successfully avoided crashing his car, the hands disappeared. Rufus asked that the story not be published until after his death, so we don't have the opportunity to further check out the report.
Number 5 on this list is Stahls' Gateway to Hell. Anything named Stahl was just doomed from the start, guys. Thrillist says the tiny town of Stahl has counted very few residents since it was founded in 1856. The most famous is rumored to be Lucifer himself, who some say appears at the town cemetery on Halloween and spring equinox. They say he uses the site where a roofless church once stood as a portal to and from hell. Some say that he's drawn to the site of frequent witch hangings. Others believe one of the graves actually contains Satan's own child. Either way, new graves continue to be dug despite signs warning against trespassers, perhaps referring directly to the Prince of Darkness himself or the cults that are rumored to flock to the grounds. The first published article about the horrors are traced back to a 1974 article in the University Daily Kansan, though whispers about evil have persisted since 1900 or so. In 1998, the hanging tree was torn down to stop people from visiting. It hasn't lessened the need for a small town to bolster an annual police presence to deter visitors looking for a glimpse of the devil himself. So we have witch hangings here, we have cults that flock here, and then we also have the worst thing of all, the literal devil potentially calling this place home. How could somebody decide to name a town Stahl? That is way too close to the word skull and it's just destined for failure. People have been smart enough not to live here all that much, and as Thrillist has said, the residents are few and far between, but it doesn't change the fact that this place is deeply haunted. If the devil truly does live here and there is a portal to hell, then there's no telling what other crazy things can happen here. Maybe there are few residents around because the devil has been taking them. I also think it's interesting that there are more police around this place. Why would there be a bunch of police around an area where there isn't that many people? Maybe the government knows something about this place that we don't. Maybe they're hiding something and don't want locals finding out. It's just a theory, but based on the rumors around this place, I could believe it. Number 4 on this list is the Devil's Chair. I am perfectly happy with my lazy boy and don't need to be sitting on any type of devil's chair anytime soon. Insider says the legend of the Devil's Chair goes like this. An old farmer in Alma refused to sell his land to the city in order to build a new cemetery. Someone got a little too tired of waiting for him to sell, so he was pushed into his own well. Eventually, somebody said that there was a terrible smell coming from the well, so the city sent someone to investigate. It was ruled that the well was empty and it was boarded up. Now, if you make your way to Alma, you can actually sit on the boarded up well, but legend says that people who have sat on the well have been known to mysteriously disappear. Where the heck did my dude go? He was down there in the well and then just poof, he was gone. Like, did his body go underwater and just couldn't be seen, or was there something more paranormal afoot? Well, whatever happened to the body, I guess it doesn't matter too much now because there is certainly something paranormal happening here today. If you sit on this chair, you will literally go missing. Yeah, maybe let's stop sitting on the haunted well that people have named the Devil's Chair. Maybe, oh, I don't know, let's put a fence around it, or better yet, let's just destroy the damn thing. Number 3 on this list is Sawyer Castle. Sawyer Castle is currently haunted by the ghosts of 2 lovers who left this world far too soon. Ranker says, this haunted Kansas mansion has many gruesome tales attached to it, but certainly the most awful one involves the tragic suicides committed by a husband and wife during the Civil War. The owner of the house had gone to fight and instructed his wife to wait for the arrival of a particular ferry that he would be coming home on. When her husband did not return on that theory, she assumed him dead and hung herself in the bell tower. However, he was in fact still alive, and upon his arriving home, he found his wife dead and killed himself out of misery. It's said that strange lights and noises emanate from the house's bell tower to this day. This story is very similar to that of a classic play, Romeo and Juliet. Two lovers, held apart by something out of their control, take their own life in what is a clear miscommunication. Even though this was horrible, I suppose that they sort of got what they wanted. Now they're together forever, but just in ghost form. Of course, they can't just let this lie though and have to haunt this place and ruin everyone else's life who's still living here. Maybe they think that because they're still together and technically still around, that they should own the home, and anyone in it that's not them is a trespasser. Whatever it is that they think, they make it very difficult for those who go around here. I'd avoid this place altogether if I was you. Number 2 on this list is Fort Leavenworth. What happened here back in the day is enough to make anyone's hair raise. Ranker says Fort Leavenworth is considered to be one of the most haunted army bases in the US, and it's home to a number of helpful and malignant spirits. It has seen centuries of war and is home to a military prison called the United States Disciplinary Barracks. During World War II, there was a prisoner uprising, and as punishment for their unruliness, one prisoner was hung every hour for 14 hours. They quickly ran out of space in the gallows and also used one of the elevator shafts in the administration building to hang people. Ever since then, screams have been heard from that same elevator shaft at odd hours. Not surprisingly, nearly every building on the base has a horrifying story attached to it. I know that it was war and they were trying to have an uprising, but my gosh, hanging one person an hour? Like, that is just so brutal. No wonder this place is deeply haunted now. All of the spirits from back then are locked into this place and refuse to let go. And you better believe that they make the people who are still around pay for what happened in the past. People have reportedly been attacked by invisible spirits before. They've been clawed at and bitten, and one person even had their finger ripped right off of their body. Things are not pleasant at this army base, and I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't been razed to the ground yet. Might be the only thing left to do to quiet these spirits down. And finally, number 1 on this list is the ghost of Saline River. You already know that this is going to be a scary legend when they have a name like that. Ranker says, according to legend, a Native American ghost by the name of Takaluma is said to walk the banks of the Saline River and was first spotted by a cowboy in the winter of 1879. Takaluma's spirit was condemned to wander the river until he found the skull of his dead father, who had been murdered by white men in the 1840s. The ghost rose from his burial mound and warned that far more powerful spirits might join in the search, but the skull has still never been found. What a horrible fate. Your father gets murdered, and then you have to spend the rest of your existence as a ghost wandering around this river searching for his skull. This ghost was once a calm presence, but time has made Takaluma angry. Now it's said that this ghost will drag unsuspecting victims into the river and drown them, then take their skull and see if he can convince the other spirits that it's his father's. This has never worked before, but when you have a literal eternity, I suppose you'll try anything. A beautiful river to look at from a distance, but not one that you want to get too close to. Number 5 on this list is a super weapon. One thing that's widely believed about Area 51 is that for a while it was used as a place to develop and test nuclear weapons. Located out in the middle of the desert, very secluded, it made for the perfect spot to develop such deadly weapons. As time went on and the Cold War quieted down, there was less of an emphasis on manufacturing such bombs. In fact, dismantling these bombs has been something that's been going on for quite some time in an effort to make sure we avoid nuclear annihilation of the entire planet. This is all well and good and probably the best thing for all of us. But some believe that this site is kept so secret because there's another type of weapon at play. Nobody knows exactly what it could be, but some people speculate that the United States government specifically uses this site as a place to develop a super weapon. Something that the world would have never seen before. Whether this weapon would take the place of a bomb or a gun or a pathogen is currently unknown, but it would dwarf the atomic bomb in deadliness for sure. Dismantling all atomic bombs looks really good in the tabloids. Making a massive super weapon that could destroy entire countries doesn't look nearly as good. This is why the government has made it their mission to keep it all under wraps. Also, if word got out that the government was trying to make some sort of super weapon, well, it doesn't matter what the actual intentions behind the weapon are, other countries would interpret that as very threatening. They would then either need to build their own super weapon or try to stop America from ever completing the construction of theirs. Both of these scenarios would be very bad for humanity and is definitely something that the American government would want to avoid. I have no idea what this super weapon could be or what it could entail, but if America was making something like this, you have to imagine that Area 51 would be the spot for it. Number 4 on this list is the moon landing. With the Cold War at its height and the space race in full swing, the United States in 1969 made the first successful moon landing in human history, or at least that's what they wanted us to think. Ever since the moon landing took place, conspiracy theories of its validity have run rampant. Many people believe that the Americans never really landed on the moon in 1969, but just faked the whole thing to get a leg up in the Cold War. Most people believe that Area 51 was the site where they filmed the whole thing. Area 51 is a massive space that's super closed off to the public. This would be the perfect location to film something like the moon landing if you ever were to do such a thing. You wouldn't want to draw attention to a set like this, so renting out a studio in LA probably wouldn't have been the best idea. If this is true, then it also begs the question, how many other things have been doctored here? Does the United States regularly film stuff here that isn't real and then release that to the public? Unless somebody comes out from the film crew that made this fake video, sadly, we probably won't ever know. Number 3 on this list is Mutant Experiments. Aliens are obviously the first thing that we think about when it comes to Area 51, but maybe there are some other strange creatures that are hiding at this base. If you've ever seen the show Stranger Things or are regular on videos like this, then I imagine you've probably heard of the project MK Ultra. If you haven't, then this was an illegal project conducted by the CIA starting in the 50s to try and wield the power of mind control. Through a series of horrible experiments, the CIA would take people, often give them large amounts of hallucinogens, and then subject them to forms of psychological torture. Lots of the people that took part in these experiments were horribly scarred for life, and most of them never recovered. This whole process broke so many human rights violations and really was not a good look for the American government. They eventually stopped in the 70s, and when this info was finally released to the public, faced some pretty bad backlash because of it. Experiments of this nature may not be happening anymore, but many have speculated that something similar could very easily be going on at Area 51. In 2018, new documents were released about MK Ultra, and it showed that the CIA had 6 dogs run, then stop, then all turn around and run back, all from implanting brain chips in them. Is it possible that something similar is going on here, where maybe they're making some mutant controllable animal? What about experiments involving humans that the government doesn't want reaching the public? If they've done it before, then there's no reason to think that they aren't capable of doing it now. Maybe these experiments don't involve mind control, but potentially taking some characteristics of an animal and putting them into a human. We've seen over the past decades a growing interest in mutant animals, so there's no reason to think that one bright scientist wouldn't want to try this with people as well. We obviously don't know for sure, but a secluded, secretive base in the desert is pretty much the perfect spot to perform mutant experiments if you ever were to do such a thing. Number 2 on this list is the Roswell Incident. According to Wikipedia, the Roswell Incident is the 1947 recovery of balloon debris from a ranch near Corona, New Mexico by United States Army Air Forces officers from Roswell Army Airfield, and the conspiracy theories decades later claiming that the debris involved a flying saucer and that the truth had been covered up by the United States government. Well, many people believe that this apparent flying saucer is currently residing in Area 51. This is what you've heard about Area 51 for. This is where it's got its big name: alien tech. This site is used as a secret base to investigate alien technology. This alien tech is getting regularly tested and experimented with by the government at this site. Some believe that America got these UFOs, brought them to this site, and now are trying to reconstruct them and use that technology to build their own advanced spacecraft. Whether the spaceships that they're in possession of have advanced weaponry on them, that's unknown, but one has to imagine that they would contribute to warfare in some capacity. One also has to imagine that if America got access to flying saucers in 1947, that they've probably succeeded by now in their attempts at remanufacturing said flying saucers. Who knows what sort of crazy otherworldly tech is being stored in Area 51 that is super top secret? How much does the government actually know about extraterrestrial life that they aren't telling you? I can't say for sure, but I'd hedge my bets that the answers are in that base. Number 1 on this list is aliens. We just talked about how they probably have alien tech chilling at Area 51. Well, how about the actual extraterrestrials who made that tech? Many people believe that Area 51 is not only a spot for testing alien equipment, but also a holding spot for any aliens that the government has come into contact with. It's very likely that these aliens are already dead, but I also don't see why it wouldn't be possible for them to potentially have some of these aliens alive and just locked up. Having alien life locked up in a very secret base is something that you wouldn't want getting out to the public, but it isn't just humans you'd need to worry about. If this is true, and this info was confirmed and then leaked to the public, well, I can only imagine the species of alien that our prisoner belongs to would want to get their friend back. If they were intelligent enough to get to this planet with supposed advanced technology, then we can only assume that they're a superior being to us. Having a superior being pissed off with the entirety of the human race probably isn't the best idea and something that should be avoided at all costs. Also, even if this alien's friends didn't care and just left their buddy behind, well, the panic and chaos that this would cause in the world would be insane. One would have to assume that other countries would be demanding to investigate the alien for themselves, that the global public would want answers and would be irate if we didn't get them, that people would start to lose their minds worrying about the possibility of aliens attacking the planet. It makes perfect sense why the American government wouldn't want people to know about such a thing. And honestly, when I think about it more, maybe ignorance truly is bliss when it comes to Area 51.
In at number 5 we have Empire State Building Bermuda Triangle. We've all heard about the Bermuda Triangle. Also known as the Devil's Triangle, it is loosely defined as being a region in the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean. A number of aircraft and ships are said to have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Since then, planes changed their flight path to avoid the triangle. Others avoid going anywhere near it altogether. But did you know New York has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle? It is located in Midtown, more specifically a large radius around the Empire State Building. Starting in 2008, drivers started to complain about the 5-block radius around the Empire State. Their cars would inexplicably die and refuse to start up again. It was almost every day, says Ronnie Yakubovich, manager of NYC Tire and Auto Care. He went on to explain that he would pick up the cars and tow them outside of the radius and they would suddenly start to work as normal. His best guess is that the radio signals from the broadcast beacon on the tower were disabling alarm systems in cars and preventing them from starting. But if that was so, why did this only start in 2008? The Empire State Building was opened in 1931, so why did this start so recently? I guess we'll never know what is causing the phenomenon. Maybe just avoid the area if you can. In at number 4, Super Rats of Hurricane Sandy. One New Yorker told the story of him and his roommates. They had lived peacefully in a 5th floor loft for years with barely a cockroach invading the space. Then, the winter after Hurricane Sandy, the noises began, scratching and scurrying. I walked into the kitchen one day and saw a rat the size of a small cat crawling across our food shelves, Kevin says. Traps and an exterminator proved ineffective. It was baffling that the rats would find their way to the 5th floor. Then the roommates read reports about rats fleeing inland from flooded subway tunnels after Hurricane Sandy. A theory was going around that the weaker rats were wiped out and the surviving rodents bred a new generation of tougher, meaner super rats. There are reports of super rats even today. Some businesses demand that the city steps in and does something as outside dining became more normal within the last year. The diners were being harassed by the giant rats. Many diners have had to leave due to the dangerous nature of the giant animals. They claimed the rats were getting increasingly hungry with the lack of tourism, leaving them with less to feed off on the streets. The city continues to claim that these super rats do not exist despite the number of sightings and photos of the giant rodents. Many live in fear that the rats might make their way into the apartments as they are harder to kill than the usual infestation. In at number 3 we have Cropsy. In the mid-90s, Ariel Abramowitz went to camp across from the notorious disused mental institution Willowbrook in Staten Island. She recalls counselors taking campers to an old building on the site, with something like blood smeared on the walls. They spooked them with tales of a boogeyman named Cropsy. Allegedly, he was a respected community member. He has a family and a child who he loved. One summer, he sent his child to the local camp. His son was later confirmed to have died at the camp. This sent the man mad. He disappeared from his life. No one knew where he had gone, but before he left, he vowed to get revenge on the other kids and campers. He was later found and taken to a mental hospital. The next time we would hear of him, he was described as a homicidal madman, an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand who hunted children and dragged them back to the tunnel system that lay under the abandoned ruins of the old Seaview Hospital, a former tuberculosis sanitarium. Soon the urban legend would be unmasked as Andre Rand. Rand worked as a janitor at the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, a place whose name alone has the power to frighten adults and children alike. The institution, built as a respite for children with intellectual disabilities, was revealed to be a living hell in the 1970s, although authorities wouldn't close the school until 1987. Rand had a long rap sheet of crimes against children. In 1983, he went to jail again after kidnapping a bus full of kids from the local YMCA and driving them to an airport. And though there wasn't enough physical evidence to charge him, police already suspected him in the disappearances of at least 4 other Staten Islanders. To this day, none of the bodies have been found. Rand's story and that of Cropsy continues to fascinate and horrify tri-state residents to this day. Coming in at number 2, we have Haunted Dakota. The Dakota building set the standard for Upper West Side apartment living, built at a time when the upper classes were only just becoming familiar with the concept of living in an apartment. It was known for having famous artists as residents, and the board were very picky about who they allowed to live there. One of the most famous couples to live at the Dakota was John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono. Years after John Lennon was shot dead in front of his Central Park West apartment building, the Dakota, his widow Yoko Ono saw his ghost sitting at his white piano. She claims he turned to her and said, "Don't be afraid, I'm still with you." When he was alive, Lennon himself claimed to have spotted a figure wandering the halls of the Dakota, whom he referred to as the Crying Lady Ghost. Other residents are said to have encountered the spectre of a little girl about 7 years old, smiling and laughing and greeting people in the hallways. The Dakota's original owner, Edward Clark, had an interest in the paranormal and would often host seances to communicate with the dead. The more you play with the paranormal, the more likely you are to experience paranormal activity in the future, says paranormal researcher. She believes that when people are murdered suddenly and violently, their spirits linger. In John Lennon's case, his life was cut short in his prime. He was only 40 years old. Someone like him was happy to be alive. He was working, he had a small child, he had unfinished business. It's a prime recipe for a classic haunting. And finally, in at number 1, we have Mole People. There are around 700 miles of subway tracks underneath New York City. Did you know that the large sections of the track that isn't used is home to the Mole People? Thousands of homeless people and families have created a community underground. The Mole People are living under popular parts of town without the people who are walking above even knowing they are there. They travel under cover of darkness as not to be evicted from their underground homes. Ever since the Great Depression, there have been many homeless people in New York City. During the difficult period, people started using the subway tunnels as a place to live. The places where homeless people live are dangerous. Rodents and reptiles lurk through the tunnels. There are debris and other hazards in the dark, plus the darkness conceals criminals, and Mole People are often the victims of attacks. Thieves even steal what little they have. The entrances to the subway tunnels are easily accessible by anyone who has the desire to venture into them. There are numerous entrances throughout the city. However, it is illegal to enter, and going into them can result in criminal charges. Just like any place that numerous people live, the Mole People form communities. Most of them look after each other, but there is also a kind of hierarchy. Most of them are very territorial over the section of the tunnels where they live. After all, it is their home. There are couples and even families that live underground. The sad part is these people risk losing their kids if authorities find out they do not have a place to live. So the families living in the subway do their best to stay concealed. People are not the only ones living in the subway tunnels under New York City though. Many animals live beneath the streets. Some of the Mole People even domesticate these animals and live with them. These animals keep them company in the very isolated and lonely place they call home. The Mole People do anything they can to eat and obtain the things they need. It's difficult for them though. They have to wait until it's dark to emerge from their homes. If authorities see them, they risk getting in trouble. Throughout the years, the city has made efforts to clean sections of the subway tunnels. However, the task is so vast that many abandoned areas remain untouched, especially the parts of the system that are no longer in use. As the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind.
Number 5 on this list is Okiku. I was talking the other day on this channel about some super creepy dolls and how Annabelle would be high up on the list. Well, a list on creepy dolls would also need to have Okiku. Gajinpo says, the story goes that in 1918 in Hokkaido, Ikichi Suzuki purchased for his young sister, Kikoko, a traditional Japanese Okapa doll. Sadly, Kikoku died from a cold and the family kept the doll in a shrine to their daughter and named it Okiku. However, the family noticed something odd about the doll. Over time, its hair was getting longer. The family believed the doll possessed with the restless spirit of their deceased daughter and so looked after it until entrusting it in the care of Mananji Temple. There, the doll remains slowly growing human hair. You can visit Okiku, but photography isn't allowed. Today, even after a few trims from the temple's priests, the doll's hair has grown past its knees. It's also supposedly upped its terror. The priests claim to have nightmares of Okiku, and visitors say the doll's mouth is slowly opening and sprouting baby teeth. I think the creepiest thing about this for me is the baby teeth that this thing is reportedly growing. Like, how on earth is that even possible? Actually, I'll answer that for you. It isn't. This completely defies all logic and goes against everything that we understand about life and growth. It sounds to me like this thing is slowly but surely coming alive and becoming a hybrid between a human being and a doll. I also really don't like the idea that the priests who are around this thing have nightmares about it. For all we know, these nightmares aren't even dreams at all, but they're real. Maybe this thing gets up in the night, moves around, and they just think that they're having a nightmare, but really it's real life. As far as I'm concerned, this doll needs to be destroyed as soon as possible. Everything about it screams unnatural and creepy, and I doubt that anyone would be surprised if, in a few years, this thing decided to become alive and start pulling a Chucky and just going on a total killing spree. Number 4 on this list is Akamanto. If you think the trip to the bathroom after Taco Bell is bad, then clearly you've never had to deal with Akamanto. Gajinpo says, Akamanto meets victims when they're most vulnerable. On the toilet. He wears a white mask and a long red cape. There are many variations to the legend. He holds red and blue toilet paper in some stories, but he's only in his cape in others. However, he always asks the victim to choose a color, red or blue. It doesn't matter what you answer because Akamanto kills you regardless. Choosing red rewards you with a stabbing, spilling your blood all over the stall. If you answer blue, Akamanto either suffocates you or sucks out your blood, leaving you blue-faced and dead on the floor. So your best bet is to either ignore the fiend or run away. Akamanto's origins are a mystery but are likely inspired by the Japanese school toilets where the grisly murders occur. In Japan, every English teacher can attest to being in an eerily large yet empty school with a bathroom furthest away from the others, old and unkept. Moreover, who wants to answer questions while trying to take a number 2? This is honestly the worst demon I think I've ever heard of, guys. Like, literally, screw you, Akamanto. It's been a long, tiring day so far. I'm exhausted. I just need to take a tiny break to go and take a poo, and yet here you are trying to kill me. Taking a dump is supposed to be relaxing, freeing experience. For a few minutes, I get to be transported away from where I am and just chill. Ruining that tiny time period that we get in the day to ourselves is pretty freaking lousy. Most of the time, I recommend running away from demons or outsmarting them. But I don't know, guys. I think with this dude, I'd be so pissed off that my poo's getting interrupted, I might just have to throw hands. If I died defending toilet time, then you know what? At least I know I died valiantly. Number 3 on this list is Maruka Castle. Maruka Castle is a beautiful Japanese castle. Problem is that the weather is not nearly as nice. In fact, it's almost always raining at this castle. Rarely a few hours ever go by without rain coming down a little bit at this place. Well, believe it or not, this isn't just some fluke of nature. There's an urban legend here. To understand what this urban legend is, you must first understand what Hitobashira is. Hitobashira was a kind of human sacrifice in Japan where lords would brick people up in their homes or their castles, and the person would slowly die locked away in this tiny bricked up chamber. The thinking was that this would appease the gods and that this would protect the building that this person was sacrificed in. Well, this castle was host to one of the most famous Hitobashira stories ever. There was one wall in this castle that just could not seem to stay up. It kept being reinforced, but it never mattered. It would always find a way to crumble. Well, the only logical thing to do at this point is to brick a human being up in it and hope that that works. A one-eyed peasant woman named Oshizu was chosen for this sacrifice. She was okay with doing it, but requested that the lords make her 2 sons into samurai after her death. They happily agreed to this and proceeded to brick her up and sacrifice her to the gods. They never kept the promise though, when the 2 boys didn't become samurai. Now it rains constantly because Oshizu is always crying for her sons. At springtime, the river overflows and it's really detrimental for the locals. So much so that they even built a tomb in her honor, but it didn't matter though, her tears continue to rain down. Number 2 on this list is the Howling Inunaki Tunnel. So this is a weird one for sure. The tunnel is only one part of the legend because on the other side of the tunnel is a mysterious village that hardly anyone has ever been able to see. Gajinpo says, supposedly located deep in the Inunaki countryside of Kyushu's Fukaku prefecture, this abandoned village is said to only be accessible through Inunaki Tunnel. The stories say that all who enter the village are doomed to a violent death. These myths and tales also seem to mention that there's some sort of official sign stating the Japanese constitution is not in effect past here, meaning that all who enter are on their own to face the real or supernatural horrors that await. The tales, however, were likely inspired by a brutal murder that actually took place in Inunaki Tunnel. The tunnel, being remote and rarely used by traffic, was a popular spot for gangs. One afternoon in December 1988, a group of teens kidnapped, robbed, and tortured a 20-year-old boy before burning the young man alive deep within the tunnel. Today, Inunaki Tunnel, or Howling Dog Tunnel in Japanese, is considered one of the most haunted places in Japan. Large concrete bricks block its entrance. No one knows if the village beyond this tunnel is real or not, and it's kind of impossible to ever find out because if you ever actually got there, then you just die immediately. Even if this place is real though, clearly this tunnel has seen its fair share of death over the years with the story of the boy. The government has literally just written it off completely and doesn't even seem to care what goes on here. This is definitely a spot to avoid in Japan. The consequences could be dire if you go here. Number 1 on this list is Kujasaka Ona. This is by far one of the most famous Japanese urban legends and certainly one of the scariest. Scoop Whoop says, considered to be the wife of a samurai warrior who slit open her mouth when he found out about her infidelity, Kujasaka Ona has an interesting urban legend surrounding her. She walks on the streets after sunset on foggy days with her face covered with a surgical mask approaching travelers. She then asks the travelers if they thought that she was pretty, and most would answer with a yes. Well, she'll then remove her mask, exposing her slit mouth. She'd then ask the traveler again if they thought that she was pretty. If they answered with a yes again, she produces a pair of scissors and slits their mouth open. If they say no, then she'll produce a scythe and then cut them in half. Apparently, the trick is to answer saying that she looked average, which would confuse her and she'd have to leave. I've never heard a story where telling somebody that they looked average ended well, but I guess that's what we have here, guys. Number 5 in this list is the Arkansas Highway 365. There's quite the tale that surrounds this highway in Arkansas, one that makes driving on it quite scary. Arkansas.com says, years ago a young man was driving down Arkansas 365 south of Little Rock when he saw a young girl on the roadside. He offered to give her a lift and draped his coat over her shoulders because she was cold and soaked from the rain. She gave him directions to her house. When the young man got out of the car and walked around to the other side to help her out of her seat, no one was there. Confused, the man walked up to the house and knocked on the door. A woman answered and she explained what had occurred. She said, that young girl is my daughter who was killed years ago. She hitchhikes back home once a year. The young man then drove to the cemetery to see the young girl's grave. There he found his coat draped over her tombstone. This is just one of the stories of this young girl, but this happens, as the woman suggested, once a year. Once a year, a good Samaritan who is simply trying to help the young girl will be fooled into driving a ghost around for a few hours. I have no idea how that dude, after getting to the cemetery, was able to get in his car and keep driving after that. Like, the second I saw my coat dangling from the tombstone like that, I would immediately tapped out. I couldn't figure out what time of year this happens at, which is too bad, because then I could have warned you guys, but be aware that it will happen without fail at least once. So if you do see a young girl on the side of the road along this highway, definitely stop to help, but just know you might be picking up a ghost. Number 4 on this list is Mary Walters. The legend of Mary Walters goes hand in hand with the legend and haunting that surrounds Curran Hall. Arkansas.com says, currently the home of the Little Rock Visitors Information Center, the house was originally built by Colonel Ebenezer Walters for his young bride Mary. Mary Walters was never able to see the completed structure as she died in childbirth just before the house was finished. Grief-stricken, Colonel Walters left the state and the house was owned by several different people, some of whom have reported experiencing the presence of Mary Walters. Visitor center staff have also experienced eerie occurrences, including a picture coming off the wall and a coffee machine making coffee with no grounds or water present. Mary Walters apparently haunts this ground now and the areas surrounding it. Nobody really knows what it is that she wants, just that she's here all the time, haunting everyone and everything. I guess she must really be fascinated by the coffee maker though, because that's often a device that she haunts and messes with. Maybe just technology in general is something that gets to her. Considering she never got to see this building get finished, to see it now, totally finished, and also with literal futuristic stuff in it would be kinda crazy. Well, I guess normal stuff for us, but futuristic stuff for her. Either way, she isn't said to be a dangerous ghost, just an annoying one. Be wary if you ever end up at Curran Hall, Mary Walters might be watching. Number 3 on this list is the Clayton House. This has got to be one of the most haunted spots in Arkansas and has developed quite the legend around it. Arkansas.com says, originally serving as the residence for William Henry Harrison Clayton and his family, the Clayton House has also been home to several paranormal experiences. Director Martha Seiler and her employees steer clear of a bedroom on the second floor where the sounds of boots stomping and doors slamming have been heard. In Clayton's study, Seiler and her daughter have both seen an apparition of a woman with gray hair dressed in brown. A carpenter took some pictures while working on the house, and when he got them back, a woman appeared. Paranormal investigators have captured several recordings in the house, including one of a cat meowing and a man yelling an obscenity. When the public was invited on these investigations, a woman reported her hair being tugged and a man saw a person's face. Wow, so there is a lot going on here and a lot to break down. First off, we have the sounds that are coming from the second floor. Boots stamping on the ground and doors slamming. Is this potentially the ghost of William Henry Harrison Clayton expressing his disapproval of something? If so, what is he trying to tell us and why does he seem so mad? Second off, we have the woman who's appearing in the Clayton study. Who is she? Is she the wife of William? And what would have happened to her that has caused her ghost to stay here? I imagine it must have been something pretty tragic. Then we have a carpenter taking pictures and a woman show up in them who wasn't there. Is this the same woman who was in the study, or is this a different woman entirely? And finally, we have some paranormal investigators capturing literal recordings of the ghosts and ghouls who reside here. Also, they captured a cat too. Don't know if that was just a cat or a ghost cat or like what the cat has to do with it, but now we have to factor that into this mess of a place as well. One big circus of ghosts is what this house is, and the thing that has stumped everyone is why. From my research, I couldn't find any horrific tragedies that went down here. It's just an old house. I guess sometimes it really do just be like that, and this place was just meant to be haunted. Number 2 on this list is the Allen House. What is it with Arkansas and these creepy houses, man? And they all have creepy names too. Like the Allen House. Who the heck would want to stay at the Allen House? Anyways, Arkansas.com says, built in 1906, the Allen House is located along North Main Street and features Gothic-style architecture and wrought iron fencing. The house was planned by local businessman Joe Lee Allen to be the most impressive house the town had ever seen. Unfortunately, in December 1948, the family experienced a grave tragedy. Their daughter, Liddell, consumed mercury cyanide-laced punch in the house's master suite. Out of grief, her mother sealed off the room, and it would not be entered by anyone for nearly 4 decades. During its time as an apartment building in the 1950s, tenants would report eerie occurrences including hazy figures appearing in photographs, furniture being unexplainably rearranged, and several reports of a lady sitting in a turret window. So at least with this house we have a reason as to why it's haunted. In the last one we didn't even know, there wasn't anything clear. I think this one is pretty clear and obvious though. Liddell took her own life in the master suite, and the mother completely sealed off that room, effectively trapping any spirit or paranormal energy in there. Such a tragic story that you never want to hear. Now we can't forget that story either because the paranormal events, and I'm assuming Liddell's spirit, keeps haunting this place. Avoid the Allen House altogether if you're ever in Arkansas. And finally, number 1 on this list is Ghost Mountain. This is definitely the sickest and most twisted story on this list for sure. Arkansas.com says, a tragic story surrounds a mountain southeast of Drake Field Airport in Fayetteville. In the 1930s, a man came home to his wife and child after a long night of drinking. His wife had been up all night caring for the sick child whose incessant crying had made the inebriated father furious. In his anger, he grabbed the baby, stumbled outside, and threw the child down their well. His wife grabbed the well's rope in an attempt to save the baby, but the father cut the rope, leaving the wife and child in the well. The father left town, never to be seen again. Reports have been made that a woman's screams and a baby's crying can still be heard in this location. If this story is true, then my god, this father rivals the most sick and twisted individuals to ever walk this earth. I don't care how drunk you are, to take your kid and to throw your own child, your own flesh and blood, into a well, and then have your wife follow that child, and to leave them there. This is the scum of the earth, guys. It's no wonder this place is haunted based on an event like this. My heart just goes out to that child and that wife, and hopefully one day their souls can find peace. Number 5 on this list is the Mutant House. A ghost has a firm grip over this house and refuses to let go of it. Legends of America says, built in 1885, this old home was host to frequent Saturday night parties. On one such evening, the event ran into the wee hours of Sunday morning. Having been kept up very late, a maid who had worked for the party the prior evening overslept the next morning. Rushing from her bedchamber, she ran down the back staircase to the kitchen and fell to her death. Today, witnesses report that lights from the back staircase turn on and off by themselves on Sunday mornings, followed by the smell of cooking bacon from the kitchen when nobody's there. This house, which serves as an art gallery today, was listed on the National Register of Historic Places on July 12, 1974, located at 704 North 4th Street. Now apparently the author of this article actually went there personally, and they had an interaction with this ghost in person. They say, my husband and I took a guided tour of the Mutant House 2 years ago, and I had quite an interesting experience. The nice lady who gave us the tour gave us all the history of the house when I happened to glance up to the top of the stairs and saw a young woman, maybe early 20s, peering over the edge of the banister. She seemed to be regarding us with wary curiosity, as if to say, what are you doing here? When we went upstairs to tour the rest of the house, no one was up there. It wasn't until we took the haunted trolley tour that I learned about the young woman who supposedly died there, falling down the stairs. I'm surprised that that ghost just looked at them and didn't try to do anything else, to be honest. The ghost could have easily attacked them had she wanted to, but chose not to in that moment, which was much to the benefit of this couple. This house and its urban legend has made it so that no one actually lives here anymore except for the ghost. It's now just a spot for tourists to pop into and take a quick peek, which in all honesty is probably just pissing the ghost off even more if you think about it. Either way, I know that this couple managed to get out unscathed, but I still don't think that going to this place is the best choice. I'd avoid it if you can. Number 4 on this list is the North 3rd Street home. Nellie Trueblood. That's the name of the person who used to live here. I feel like with a name like that, this place was just destined to be haunted. Nellie was a lonely person who died alone in this house many years ago. One would think that because she was so lonely, after she died, she wouldn't have wanted to cling to this world anymore, but that's exactly what she did. The new owners bought and moved into this house and then started renovating it. Well, apparently Nellie wasn't too fond with changing things up and liked it the way that it was. Balls of light that were roughly 2 feet wide would appear out of thin air and bounce around the home, scaring the living bejesus out of the workers who were sent to renovate it. This was enough for those guys to end the renovations prematurely and leave the house unfinished. Apparently, a family member of Nellie's would later come out and say that they weren't surprised she still haunts this place. This home was deeply loved by the family, and it would make sense that she would want to keep it the way that it is. The family member assured people that she wouldn't hurt anyone, but after seeing the orbs, no one was buying into it. This home was officially listed as unlivable thanks to Nellie and her ghostly presence. Stay away from this place if you don't want Nellie and her orbs to come after you. Number 3 on this list is Theater Atchison. The people of Kansas are going to need to be looking to find their live performances elsewhere if they don't want to get haunted. Legends of America says, built in 1913 as the first Church of Christ, the building was modeled after the architectural lines of its mother church in Boston. In 1973, the Presbyterian Church bought the building, and 10 years later, they created a community theater organization. Today, the building is known as the Presbyterian Community Center and is home to Theater Atchison. Allegedly, it is also home to an unearthly spirit. Guests often describe feeling an unknown presence with them while visiting the theater, while others working in the building describe odd noises that are often heard that have no apparent earthly cause. The word unearthly makes me pause for a second there. That makes me think that we might not even be dealing with a standard ghost or spirit here, but something far worse. Some type of underworld creature that is coming to harvest people's souls. Or something similar, but from a completely different planet. Now, why an alien would decide to conduct its devilish acts inside a Kansas theater is beyond me, but I guess I'm not from another planet, so I wouldn't know. This is more than just the Shakespearean Macbeth curse, folks. This is evil and dangerous, and it's not something that you want to mess with. Number 2 on this list is the Gargoyle Home. I think gargoyles are pretty dope, honestly. They're really cool and super fun to look at. Maybe just not on my home though. Legends of America says, more often referred to as the Wagner House, this turn-of-the-century home was built in 1884 and 1885 by B.P. Wagner, who was a lawyer and politician in the Atchison area in the late 1800s. While gargoyles are usually erected to scare off evil spirits, legend has it that Wagner accumulated his wealth through a deal with the devil, and the gargoyles were constructed in honor of the pact. It's said that the house is afflicted by an evil curse. One homeowner who attempted to remove the gargoyles fell to his death on the staircase. A segment on the Travel Channel reported that Kansas City ghost hunters, while visiting the home, picked up the presence of ghosts on their special equipment and reported having felt a presence in the house. This house was placed on the National Register of Historic Places on May 3rd, 1974, located at 819 North 4th Street. So nobody knows if the gargoyles are the thing causing the curse or if it's just a coincidence that they're there. Either way, having them there seriously adds to the mystery and ominous presence that is this home, especially considering the second someone tried to take them down, that person literally died. I'm happy that no one is living in this place now and it's on the National Register thing or whatever, but that also means that this home isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Like, this house is going to be here haunting people and maybe even taking unsuspecting people's lives for a long time. That's a really scary thought. Hopefully we can get some more professionals in here to figure out what is causing this haunting for good and how to stop it. And number 1 on this list is Jackson Park. Parks are supposed to be nice, guys. This one, It isn't. Legends of America says a woman by the name of Molly is said to haunt this park. Supposedly, moaning and terrifying screams can be heard throughout the park around midnight. According to one legend, Molly was a beautiful young woman found dead in the park the day after her prom. She was found hanging by her neck to a park tree in a hollow with badly torn clothes. Allegedly, she and her date had argued the night before, and when Molly exited the car, her date drove off, leaving her in the park. It was never determined if her death was by her own hand or was murder. Though some suspected that her prom date killed her, nobody was ever charged. Another legend of the park's haunting states that Molly was a black woman who was lynched by a white mob years ago. Rather than the eerie screams of a young prom girl, the cries instead come from the brutal slaying of an African American Molly. In any case, the area today is known as Molly's Hollow, a couple's go-to park. In addition to Molly's chilling cries, many witnesses also claim to have seen a ghostly figure hanging in the tree where her body was discovered. Either one of those stories are bad and would have left their mark, so it makes sense why this place is the way that it is now. The pictures of this place are really pretty too, and it would definitely be a go-to date spot. You just have to be really careful that your romantic picnic doesn't get sinister and paranormal really fast.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Ogopogo. Let's start with a famous one. Move over Nessie, we've got a Canadian sea cryptid to discuss. If you've ever been to British Columbia, you'll know that there are plenty of mountains and lakes to explore. One of the more well-known ones, both for its picturesque qualities and supposed housing of a monster, is Lake Okanagan. Situated in Kelowna, this lake is famous for its vacation-friendly beaches. But if you head out looking for a relaxing day on the water, you might meet up with a strange beast. Sightings of the Ogopogo date back to 1972, but indigenous legends have been telling tales of the creature for much longer. It's described as a long, slender creature with many humps and a horse head that peeks out of the lake during thunderstorms. Sound familiar? While not nearly as famous, Ogopogo is quite similar to Nessie when you get down to it. Both are aquatic, hard to find, and attract all sorts of cryptid hunters. All sorts of folks have claimed to see Ogopogo swimming around, popping its head out of the water from time to time. Photos and videos are common, but none are really verifiable or convincing. Thankfully, the creature seems to be relatively friendly. For all these sightings and rumors, there haven't been too many claims of violence or aggression from the lake-dwelling beast. In fact, it's actually quite well liked by everyone. In the 90s, the Canadian government commissioned a postage stamp in honor of Ogopogo. Way to go. Skeptics all have their explanations for what it might actually be, with one prevalent idea claiming that it's actually a primitive whale that only comes out during calmer seasons. Regardless of whether it's real or not, what's more fun to say in the end, Nessie or Ogopogo? I'll let you guys decide. Coming in at number 4, we've got the University of Toronto Phantom Worker. If a film is being shot in Toronto, you're more than likely going to catch a glimpse of U of T's campus. The school's buildings are ornate and beautiful, perfect for giving a scholarly feel to any scene. A lot of the buildings have facades that date back to the early 19th century, giving them a timeless feel. Of course, with any buildings that have been around so long, there will be ghost stories. Back in the 1920s, U of T built a Gothic memorial to honor students who had died during the First World War. During construction of this elaborate memorial, many workers were hired to help out. Legend says that one of the workers fell from the tower while polishing the bells, a true Hunchback of Notre Dame moment. Ever since that fateful incident, students and faculty alike have claimed to see the ghost of the worker wandering around campus. Some even claim that there have been ghostly apparitions falling from the tower. Folks who don't know the legend will run to see if the poor fellow is okay, but never find a body. So much for being a good Samaritan. There are many other ghost stories surrounding the university as well, but none so stomach-dropping. Stonemasons with murderous qualities, little girls lost in planetariums, and a baker who managed to trap his mistress inside a secret room. The stories are real, but are the ghosts still haunting the campus? I suppose you'll have to pay the institution a visit and find out. Just try not to get roped into paying tuition, alright? That's scarier than any ghost story. Coming in at number 3, we've got the Nennerlook. We've talked about urban legends from the far west coast and the most populous city, so now let's take a trip out east. Known for its quaint, peaceful charm, Newfoundland is the last place you'd expect to find terrifying urban legends, right? I mean, you can get screeched in and end up with a scary hangover and only a faint memory of your previous night, but that's something else entirely. The monster seen near Newfoundland dwells in the sea, but does so unconventionally. How do you think sea monsters usually get around? By swimming, right? Well, this thing actually acts a little differently than most. First cited by Sir Humphrey Gilbert back in the 16th century, it was described as a lion-like creature. This fits the description of an Inuit cryptid known as the Nennerluk. Legends of such a creature have been passed down through generations of people, but it was considered just a legend to outsiders until Sir Humphrey Gilbert came across it himself. The Nennerluk is a gigantic beast estimated to be as tall as an iceberg. It's got white fur, huge ears, and loves to eat anything that gets close enough. Seals are the classic meal, but it won't turn down a human if they get close. Now, back to that bit about movement. The Nennerluk doesn't swim, it walks along the bottom of the ocean. Yep, not the most efficient way to get around, but it gets the job done. Imagine watching a gigantic beast just walk out of the sea towards you. This is also the reason why people say that it's not really ever seen away from shore. It makes sense considering how deep the ocean is. But if you ever spot a little antenna poking out of the water, it's time to get a move on. And if you ever hear a deafening roar, it's probably too late. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Cabbagetown Tunnel Monster. We'll return to Toronto for a moment, you know, because of the urban qualities of these legends. Get it? Well, every tunnel system has its fair share of legends, and the Cabbagetown Tunnel is no exception. I'm surprised nobody's gone back and tried to get footage of this strange creature. Back in the 70s, a kitten ran away from home. While searching for his lost feline, a man came across a tunnel in Cabbagetown. Thinking that the kitten might have run in here to hide, he descended down into the abyss. Scanning the darkness for any sign of the little animal, he noticed some motion off to the side. Thinking it might be what he was looking for, the man pointed his flashlight at the movement and saw something he was definitely not expecting, neither cute nor cuddly. He claims to have seen a monkey-like creature with glowing orange eyes standing at half the height of a man covered in gray fur. If that horrible sight wasn't enough, listen to this. The man froze up and kept his light trained on the monster. The monster didn't like this much and told the man in an awful, trembling voice, "Go away. Go away." And guess what the man did next? He hightailed it out of there and didn't look back. This story made its way around for a while, but nobody ever properly looked into it. That is, until a year later. The man's friend had convinced him to share his story, so he went to the Toronto Sun with the scoop. A reporter accompanied him back to the tunnel, and they both scoured the inside. Looking around, they didn't find any evidence of a monster, but they did discover the remains of a cat. Some speculate that the tunnel leads to a point in the Toronto sewer system, and others have different ideas. Either way, nobody has seen the Cabbagetown sewer monster since. Would you go looking? Finally, at number 1, we've got the ghost ship of Northumberland Strait. Heading back east for a moment, let's consider the Northumberland Strait. This is a body of water that separates Prince Edward Island from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. It's said that there is a ghost ship that sails upon the strait, more often than not totally engulfed in flame. The legend dates back over 200 years and always seems to play out the same way. Folks on land will look out to see a beautiful schooner with pure white sails. As they look on, these sails will catch fire and the whole ship starts burning. Often people will head out on rescue missions only to find that there was never a ship to begin with. Legend says that the ship will only appear before a northeast wind, predicting a storm. So where does this ghost ship come from, and why does it always come back? Well, some people believe that the ship was captained by a pirate who made a deal with the devil. The ship had been fired upon and was burning fast. He wanted his treasure hidden and protected, so he signed the pact and sealed his fate. Now he and his crew are doomed to sail forever on this perpetually burning ship. Yikes. Now, skeptics will tell you that the ghost ship is simply a mirage, but if that were the case, then how do they explain the flames? How very Canadian, eh? I'm glad my homeland has some legends that can stack up against the big ones from other nations. There are plenty more where that came from too.
Number 5 on this list is the Comanche's speed. Apparently these warriors could move faster than anyone, and this lightning quick speed struck fear into any of those who battled them. Ranker says the Comanche tribe dwelled throughout the American Southwest from as early as the 1500s and are believed to be the first of the Plains Indians to have horses. They learned to use them with great effect. According to Mexican General Manuel de Mirateran, who faced their vicious onslaughts. Their mode of attack is generally by arranging the lances in front, the guns in the center, and bows in the rear. Their horses at full speed, accompanied with the fury and yellings of demons, they were among the bravest and most warlike of the Mexican tribes. These extremely fast attacks seem to defy all physics and left their opponents stunned and usually too wounded to do anything but surrender. No one knows knows how they were so fast or if there was something supernatural about them. Most likely, they were just well-trained warriors who acted swiftly, and the legend has snowballed over the years to represent these lightning-quick fighters. Whatever the case, it apparently didn't matter how fast you were or how fast your horse was. You were no match for the Comanche. Number 4 on this list is the Berserkers. I talked about these ancient warriors in a recent video where we looked at warriors that you wouldn't want to fight. We need to bring them up again though, because there's actually a crazy urban legend surrounding them, which is part of the reason why you'd never want to fight them. Wired says the legendary Viking warriors known as Berserkers were renowned for their ferocity in battle, purportedly fighting in a trance-like state of blind rage, howling like wild animals, biting their shields, and often unable to distinguish between friend and foe in the heat of battle. But historians know very little about the Berserkers apart from scattered old Norse myths and epic sagas. Accounts of the Berserkers date back to a late 9th century poem to honor King Harald Fairhair. The 13th century Icelandic historian/poet Snorri Sturluson described Odin's Berserkers as being mad as dogs or wolves and strong as bears or wild oxen, killing people with a single blow. Specific attributes can vary widely among the accounts, often veering into magic or mysticism. There are claims that Berserkers were not affected by edged weapons or fire, but they could be killed with clubs. Other claims say they could blunt the blades of their enemies with spells or just by giving them the evil eye. Most accounts at least agree on the primary defining characteristic: a blind, ferocious rage. The legends surrounding these warriors became so well known and scattered throughout Europe that no one knew what to believe anymore. It was widely thought that these people would actually turn into wolves and beasts when they entered battle, like werewolves almost, becoming incredibly fast and strong and impossible to take down in a fight. Whether this is actually true or not is still unknown. I guess that's what makes it a good urban legend, but still, an urban legend that you probably would never want to see face to face. Number 3 on this list are the Aztecs. The Aztecs were particularly fearsome warriors who did whatever they had to get the win, even if that meant sacrificing their loved ones to gain the power of the gods. Ranker says, the gods of the Aztecs never ceased to thirst, and because the gods relied on bloodletting for nourishment, the Aztecs thrived in a state of constant warfare with intent to sacrifice. Children began training as early as the age of 5 and earned warrior status upon capturing their first sacrificial victim. They then used clubs, bows, spears, and darts to disable captives, skin and dismember them before their hearts were finally gouged out. Aztec warriors were spiritually motivated, thus their discipline and ferocity are often credited as the forces that long ensured their victory. It's believed that these warriors had a strong relationship with their god, and it was this relationship and the sacrifices that they made that allowed them to conquer as much as they did. Godlike powers would flow through them and they were almost unstoppable. They were stronger, faster, and smarter than any other warrior when they were in this state, and they were almost impossible to kill. However, with this great power comes its drawbacks. They were also much crueler in that heightened state as well. A Spanish conquistador who battled the Aztecs and somehow managed to escape with his life wrote, "Anyone facing them for the first time can be terrified by their screams and their ferocity. In warfare, they are the most cruel people to be found, for they spare neither brothers, relatives, friends, nor women. Even if they are beautiful, they kill them all and eat them." Yeah. The Aztecs weren't above eating people either, and they would do that from time to time. Maybe this was their animalistic godlike instincts taking over, I don't really know, but it is believed to have happened. You wouldn't have wanted to face the Aztecs ever, but you especially wouldn't have wanted to face them after a sacrifice, because it would have been like facing off against a god. Number 2 on this list is the Scythians fainting. This next entry details a very specific tactic that it's believed the Scythians used in combat. The tactic would apparently drain the opponent of sanity and may have included them becoming invisible. Ranker says the Scythians were renowned for the strength of their cavalry, but to their opponents opponents, the Romans, Greeks, and Persians, the Scythians were also a deceitful lot. Rather than prancing straight into the fire, the Scythians found success with a tactic called feinting. With this tactic, they would retreat from the front lines, causing their enemies to just relax enough for the Scythians to return with a surprise ambush of archers on horseback. They were regarded as invisible menaces who starved enemies by scorching their land before proceeding with attacks during mealtime and sleeping hours. Those opposing them could neither sleep, eat, nor defend themselves with clarity of mind. Rather than riches, the Scythians cherished their ability to roam and kept few belongings so that their getaways were swift and their enemies reaped no rewards. It got to the point where any shadow that flew past or any sound of any kind would set off their opponents into a frenzy, thinking that it was the Scythians. They were able to get in their head, and rumors started spreading that they could be invisible. It was also believed that anyone who fought, their mental state would deteriorate quickly afterwards. This is probably all exaggerated through word of mouth, but I can understand how this could have been believed. If you constantly had to be on guard at all times with no idea where your enemy was and how they could strike, that would cause your brain to start messing up a bit too. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Maori warrior ancestors. These ancient warriors utilized the power of their ancestors in battle and would grow extremely strong when they did this. Worshipping these ancestors, though, was done in a bit of a strange manner. Ranker says in 1642 the Dutch East India Company anchored its ships off the shores of New Zealand with sights set on inhabiting the mysterious island. The Maori, carved head to toe with tattoos, appeared the following day, prepared for battle. The Maori's main strategy was to ambush the enemy during the nighttime. In victorious celebration, they dismembered and supposedly ate their enemy's body parts, theoretically as a form of revenge originating from mythology. The Maori believed they were consuming their victims' spirits and nourishing those of their ancestors. So apparently these people believed that and eating their enemies would make them grow stronger in battle. Their ancestors would feast, and as they fed those spirits, they would grow stronger for their next fight. I highly doubt that this actually worked, but apparently they were pretty fearsome warriors, so people started to wonder if there was some truth to this tactic. I'm not really sure why their ancestors couldn't have just been happy with a really nice cooked steak, but I guess that's why I'm not a Maori warrior.
Number 5. Deception Island. There's a place in Antarctica called Deception Island, which does not even remotely sound like a place I would have any interest in visiting, because it sounds kind of evil, haunted, or at the very least intentionally misleading. Deception Island was once used as a whaling operation in the early 19th century, where whales were brought in to be harvested and processed, and as such, it's littered with the remains of the mighty creature's bones and carcasses. Unfortunately, in the early 19th century, Avatar: The Way of Water hadn't yet been released, so none of the whalers knew that whaling was bad, and they kept doing it. Maybe it's just the name, or maybe it's the reputation as an abandoned whaling station littered with macabre souvenirs of Earth's biggest mammal, but there have been all sorts of stories and rumors about Deception Island, that something or someone is still living there. Perhaps it's the spirit of the whales themselves. The whaling station was abandoned during the Great Depression and eventually found a new life, being repurposed as a British base during the Second World War. The station still stands alongside the vats where the whale fat was once burned, but it's all rusted over and lost to time. Recently, a paranormal investigation crew made the cold trek out to Deception Island to check out what the hubbub was about and experienced all manner of suspicious activity. The crew noted that when they visited the island, immediately they could see light orbs all around them and see strange shadowy apparitions, and reported hearing strange voices speaking to them, but in a language that nobody could make out. It didn't sound like any modern language. Now, in some cultures, whales are considered very important animals, even some cultures considering them as sacred. Who is to say that a ghost could only manifest as human? And there's been reported stories of animal ghosts before, and considering how much suffering there must have been there and how profoundly emotional whales are, it does seem possible that the spirits of the whales are still calling out there to this day. And if you're looking for more scary urban legends, cryptids, aliens, and just about everything else freaky under the sun, baby, look no further. Top 5 Scary's got all you're looking for and then some. Take a click through, subscribe, and enjoy. Number 4. The Ghost Ship. Speaking of non-humanoid entities, let's talk about one of my absolute favorite dinner conversation topics: Ghost ships. Back in the era of exploration, the South Pole was a treacherous pass, and countless explorers would sail their last expedition around the Antarctic. One such ship would be a schooner, the Jenny. Not much is known about the Jenny, the purpose of its original mission, or who was sailing on it. What we know of the Jenny mostly comes from when it was found, when it was discovered by a whaling ship in the year 1860. The whaling ship, the Hope, was sailing through when the spotter saw a battered, beaten, but somehow still sailing schooner passing narrowly through the gap between two icebergs. The crew of the Hope closed on in, looking to make contact, recognizing the English flag atop the mast, and assuming the ship was in grave danger. They sailed forward. There appeared to be 7 men standing on the deck, although they looked gravely underdressed for the weather. It wasn't until the Hope sailed close enough that the crew realized the men they were looking at on the Jenny weren't the crew, but nothing more than frozen remains. The men had been flash frozen solid, as if it had happened in an instant. They appeared to be in mostly good condition, not really showing signs of decomposition or anything. The Hope's captain, one Captain Brighton, boarded the Jenny to try and understand just what had happened. He went underneath the docks and found a man slumped over sitting on a barrel, a journal in his hands. Brighton went up to wake him, but immediately realized, like all of the others, he was frozen completely solid in place. He pried the journal out of his hands to read the last entry. May 4th. 1823. No food for 71 days. I am the last one still alive. If this log was to be believed, then that would mean the crew had been sailing as corpses aimlessly for decades, preserved as if not a day had passed. A real-life ghost ship. Captain Brighton took the journal with him to return it back home. Tragically, the wife of the Jenny's captain was found dead in the bedroom cabin alongside their dog. The Hope sailed off with nothing more than the journal in hand and left the Jenny idly floating across the frozen water, where she still may be to this day. Or perhaps she's plunged deep beneath the icy water. Hopefully those men got to find some peace. And oh man, I hope they found some food wherever they are. Number 3, the Terra Nova ghosts. Back in the 19th century, everyone wanted to be that first crew to be able to get to the South Pole. The North Pole, we had that all figured out. We knew all about Kris Kringle, but the South Pole was a land of opportunity and possibility. I guess we didn't know yet it was mostly just snow and ice and not much else. One Robert Falcon Scott, and wow, Falcon is a good middle name, was determined to be that first explorer to break boundaries. And in 1911, Robert Falcon Scott took a crew out on an expedition called the Terra Nova Expedition. The ship would make landfall a little later that year on the Ross Dependency, a nice little chunk of the frozen wasteland south of New Zealand. He and his team set up camp on the Great Ice Barrier, and while some crew would stay behind to look after the camp, find food and shelter, unloading sled dogs, ponies, and they built a hut with quilted insulation, while everybody else would venture forward to go towards that South Pole. However, things would not go quite as they had planned. You see, a rival explorer had already got to the South Pole about a month before Scott made it. One Roald Edmondson had already planted a black flag in the ice. Scott's crew were completely defeated and crestfallen, months and months of freezing labor, and they had absolutely nothing to show for it. History doesn't care about the second guy to get to the South Pole. A defeated Scott and the 4 men he took past the hut began a journey backwards, but it would prove treacherous. The men were already weak in spirits and started to fall to the elements. One by one, frostbite, gangrene, and starvation would take them. Scott would record one last journal entry in 1912. It's a bit harrowing, to be honest. Take a listen to this. Every day we have been ready to start for our depot 11 miles away, but outside the door of the tent it remains a scene of whirling drift. I do not think we can hope for any better things now. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write any more. Signed, R. Scott. Last entry. And for God's sakes, look after our people. Like the rest of his crew, Scott would ultimately be taken by the Antarctic. Scott's hut still stands in the Antarctic to this day, and those who've been say they feel the unease standing there, as if there's something wrong in the air. And some have even gone so far as to say they felt like they could hear the voices, chattering teeth, and suffering of the men still freezing away from the cold all these years later. Number 2, Outpost 31. Working at a research station in Antarctica can't be easy. First of all, you gotta deal with the frozen conditions, being locked up with a bunch of other people for months at a time, isolated from the rest of the world, and being on one would be haunting enough without the threat of your coworkers going mad and attacking you. Take a listen to the story of Outpost 31, a now abandoned American research station where its entire crew went missing presumed dead, and to date, no one really knows what happened. Outpost 31 was a research station located in, well, you guessed it, Antarctica, harboring 11 researchers, including one helicopter pilot, who were stationed there for the year of 1982. It was a fairly routine assignment, and all of the men involved were seasoned and no stranger to the conditions. A similar outpost maintained by a Norwegian research crew was the only sign of life nearby, which was also abandoned under similar circumstances. The only survivor seeming to be a wandering sled dog from the Norwegian station, which eventually made its way to Outpost 31 and was taken in by one Richard Clark, who was in charge of handling the sled dogs at Outpost 31. There isn't a whole lot of information available outside of a few diaries kept on computers from some of the researchers, but it was believed among the men that the dog they had brought in had been carrying some sort of foreign pathogen, some thing that had infected the men and their water and food supply, as shortly after this, there were reports of the men acting aggressive to each other, paranoid, distrusting, violent, and delusional. A log from the lead physician on the station showed that he had become so paranoid that this new novel virus they had let in would destroy the world if it breached containment, and the men had imposed themselves into a quarantine in an attempt to contain it, and eventually succumbed to madness. June 25th, 1982 was the last time anyone made any contact with Outpost 31. An SOS beacon was sent out, but when the rescue had arrived, they were shocked to discover smoldering remnants of the station. The outpost had been badly demolished, burnt, and several of the men had been found dead in brutal conditions, torn apart by wounds that didn't look like anything a human could have done. Some bodies were recovered, but concerningly, a majority of them had been completely lost with no signs whatsoever what had happened to them. But perhaps most bizarrely was the bodies found of the helicopter pilot and the chief mechanic, which were both found slumped over, frozen over, holding a bottle between them, suggesting the two men had accepted their fate and just waited for it to come. Number 1. The Ross Station Crash. Now this might be hard to imagine since we tend to exclusively think of Antarctica as a barren wasteland inhabited exclusively by penguins, but at one point in time it was actually a fairly popular destination for tourists to check out. Tourists would buy tickets for a day trip flight from New Zealand, would get treated to a delightful view of the barren frozen wasteland inhabited exclusively by penguins. It is kind of that. It was an exciting opportunity for people to get to see something that was previously thought unreachable. However, flights over Antarctica were not easy. The weather proves challenging, and visibility is very difficult, especially if there's any inclement weather. As well, because of the landscape, it can be very difficult for pilots to navigate with landmarks. Well, one such flight would suffer from all of these problems. It was 1979, and a flight carrying 257 passengers would be flying over Antarctica on a routine trip. Now, there were some issues. The crew staff in this particular flight were very inexperienced, and none of the pilots had ever flown along this flight path before. As well, data in the flight log was wrong, suggesting that there'd be okay visibility, but the day was plagued by low visibility. This, combined with the inexperienced pilots, made for a tragic combination, as the plane would crash into the side of Mount Erebus at 300 miles per hour, instantaneously ending the lives of every single person on the plane, all 257 of them. The remains of the passengers were taken to McMurdo Station, another American research station where they were cremated. Years onwards, researchers stationed at McMurdo have reported that they've heard strange things. Listen to this one report. As soon as I'd entered, I felt something was weird. I took a couple steps and the hair on top of my head stood on end. Footsteps upstairs where there shouldn't have been. Undeniably, there were footsteps above me. A slow cadence of footsteps. I froze up. Whew. Sends a chill down your spine, doesn't it? I should have been making spine chill puns this whole video. Number 5. Polybius. Our first wretched tale is that of Polybius, an arcade game that hungered for a lot more than your quarters. Close your eyes and picture it's 1981. For most of you, myself included, I'm sure that's a little bit before your time, so just picture it's the first season of Stranger Things. It's the summer of 1981. School's out, you've got not a care in the world. Your goals are to kick back, bike around town, and spend your halcyon days popping quarters at the arcade. A new game appears that no one's heard of before, called Polybius. First appearing at an arcade in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, Polybius seems deceptively simple. A game similar to Asteroids, where the player controls a little spaceship firing and geometric shapes and patterns unfurling hypnotically. It's been said that Polybius was addicting. Far more than Pac-Man or Dig Dug could ever hope to be. Lines would form around the cabinet, fights over whose turn it was, and kids would go home and complain of nightmares, night terrors, hallucinations, insomnia, and an unhealthy obsession with the game, unable to think or talk about anything else but Polybius. And every few weeks, mysterious men in black suits would visit the arcade, observe people playing Polybius for a bit, write things down in notepads and journals, and leave without speaking to anyone. Polybius was a hit with the locals, with the machine seeing constant use around the clock. As mysteriously as it appeared, a few months later, the cabinet disappeared. Attempts to uncover the truth behind Polybius bring up nothing but questions. The developers, Laschen, is a broken German translation for the words for senses and to delete senses. Records of the company are impossible to find, and no trace of the original cabinet has ever come up. But there are many online who insist that they experienced it in that fateful arcade in Portland many, many years ago. Subscribe if you dare, for we've got top scary content coming to you every day this October, and every day after that too. Number 4, the hands resist him. Take a look at this painting. It's nice, isn't it? No, of course not. If you don't have to agree with me, this thing is terrifying. Even looking at it through a screen makes me feel uneasy. This painting is titled, The Hands Resist Him, but perhaps you know it by its more colloquial name, the Haunted eBay Painting. They can't all have good names. This painting earned its reputation when it was put up for sale on eBay in the early 2000s, with a small disclaimer from the listers warning that while the painting might have a certain allure to it, that you should know it was inhabited by something evil. The listing claimed that the painting would change. The characters would change poses, claiming the girl in the painting would threaten the boy. Those who've seen the painting in person report feelings of great unease, discomfort. Those who saw it when it was briefly displayed in galleries claiming they felt like there was something there with them. Some going so far as to say they felt like there was something around their throat. Take a look at it. I mean, really look at it. Okay, you should probably tab out of the video. I don't want to be responsible for something happening to you. Most concerningly, the painting's first owner and the first person to ever have seen it publicly at its first showing both died under mysterious circumstances. The artist, of course, dismisses these claims as just coincidence, but that's what someone who painted a haunted painting would want you to think. Currently, The Hands Resist Him slumbers in the gallery of Kim Smith in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Originally, Smith had wanted to hang the painting in his own home, but was begged by his family that for their sake, they keep it away. Understandable. The painting has only been made visible to the public 6 times. And each time the viewers have complained of feeling ill. Maybe we should start to move on from this topic before it's too late for us. Number 3, the spider bite. Now this is one of my absolute favorites. I remember being told this one at a schoolyard when I was just a fledgling ghoulie. The story goes that a woman from frigid northern England, where the sun simply doesn't shine, takes a vacation to somewhere nice and sunny to soak up some rays and take a break from the dreariness of Leeds. Usually it's Mexico, so she journeys to Guadalajara. The woman, while sunbathing, is bitten by a spider without noticing. Days pass and the spider bite grows inflamed and red. She seeks out a local doctor who dismisses it as nothing more than a spider bite and tells her that it'll settle itself in a matter of days and she has nothing to worry about and should just enjoy her vacation. She continues on her vacation but notices with each passing day that the bite on her cheek is growing slightly. She complains that it's growing sore and larger, and she returns to the doctor yet again. The doctor tells her if she's truly so worried about nothing but a spider bite, she should just take a hot bath and try to relax and ease her skin. She goes back to a resort, and during the bath, the boil on her face softens and bursts, and hundreds upon hundreds of baby spiders crawl down her face as it was an egg the entire time. Just delightful. Now, some of my ghouls might recognize this particular tale from the collection of haunted stories, scary stories to tell in the dark, made famous by its absolutely wretched illustrations straight out of your childhood nightmares. I'd wager that the charcoal drawing of the spider bite woman left an impact on you the way it did me. This book changed my life, really. I used to actually be a very normal, happy kid, and then I took this out in the 3rd grade from the library, and now I can only talk about ghouls, goblins, ghosts, and grossness. Number 2, Edward Mordrake. Edward Mordrake, as the legend goes, was a young, intelligent, and good-looking noble Englishman and a talented musician. A real Renaissance man. A man with all this going for him surely led a very successful and happy life, right? Well, unfortunately for Mr. Mordrake, he was cursed to bear host to a passenger, otherwise he wouldn't be on this list. Edward Mordrake, more famously known as the man with 2 faces, is said to have been born with a face on the back of his head. It's said that his secondary face was a malignant sort. When Mordrake would cry, his face would smile and sneer. When Mordrake would laugh, it would cry. Mordrake complained bitterly of his twin. He couldn't sleep and suffered from severe insomnia, claiming that the face would whisper to him in the night. It would whisper such things they only speak of in hell. Not quite a comforting bedtime story. Really can't imagine it was too easy sharing a pillow with a fellow like that. He would beg doctors to remove it, but was told repeatedly that it wasn't possible lest he suffer the consequences, as the two were linked. The nobleman eventually couldn't bear to put up with the suffering anymore, and at the age of 23 was prompted to take his life. He left behind a note demanding that after his death, the face be destroyed and all remnants of it destroyed, for fear that it would follow him into the afterlife. The story of Edward Mordrake has captivated audiences for years, reaching its peak when Mordrake himself featured as a character on the 4th season of American Horror Story, Freak Show. So is there any truth to this, or is it just a tall tale? While no remnants of Mordrake were ever found, nor any written records, solely stories passed down from generation to generation. So whether or not it was real, all we can attest to is just how creepy it was. And number 1, La Llorona, I am so sorry to my viewers, that is definitely not how you pronounce that properly, is one of the most well-known folk legends in Hispanic culture and has been adapted, told, and retold countless times. Let me add one to that pile. No one really knows where the original legend of La Llorona appeared from, although the one connective thread between all versions of the story is that La Llorona is the spirit of a woman who cast her children away into the water and spends the rest of eternity searching for them around rivers and lakes. In some versions of the story, she was betrothed to a wealthy Spaniard who abandoned her, and after being deserted, in a fit of manic rage, she threw her out into the local river. The legend is widespread throughout Mexico and Central and South Americas. The legend goes that you can find her late at night, clad all in a white gown, patrolling around bodies of water. Where it goes from here varies from teller to teller, with some variations of the story saying that she kidnaps lost children, others saying she attacks unfaithful husbands, and some meaner variations reporting that she attacks wantonly at anyone who sees her. Regardless of the local legend, all the stories can agree that when you hear La Llorona crying, you should get away. Now, the story has found its way to several Hollywood movies, TV shows, and more. Anyone else remember that pilot episode of Supernatural? Every couple years, someone takes a new stab at the legend of La Llorona, meaning it's unlikely you'll stop hearing about her crying anytime soon. Just hope the poor girl finds those kids someday. She's been looking for a really long time.
In at number 5 we have Space Mountain. There are a surprising amount of urban legends surrounding this ride at Disney World, which is odd. It is just a ride after all, right? Nothing strange about it. According to legend, one rider was decapitated while on Space Mountain because he supposedly stood up while riding. What a f***ing idiot. Now, this is only a little bit true. There was a decapitation, but it was on a test dummy, not a real person. No person has ever been killed while riding Space Mountain. However, there is another dark legend that surrounds this ride. According to legend, on Space Mountain you can find Mr. One-Way. Some accounts describe Mr. One-Way as a red-haired man with a red face, with stories stating that he hangs out in the line for Space Mountain. But this differs depending on who you ask. According to video footage, Mr. One-Way will sometimes get onto the ride with other passengers, grabbing an available seat. However, it is said that he disappears right before you reach the final tunnel at the end of the ride. On top of that, there is supposedly a second ghost called Disco Debbie, who is also said to haunt Space Mountain, and according to some riders, she glows in the dark. Very freaky indeed. Coming in at number 4, we have Magnolia Creek Lake. Magnolia was once a thriving riverport town in southern Wakulla County, Florida, which was established all the way back in the 1820s and is now classified as an extinct city by the State Library and Archives of Florida. All that remains of the city is a cemetery, with the last known burial being back in 1859. Magnolia Creek Lane is a narrow road fit for one car at a time south of Montverde on the west side of Lake Apopka. According to legend, the road and surrounding lake is haunted by around 200 passengers who were killed in a train wreck. However, many have attempted to find evidence of this, but none has ever been found, yet the legend continues. Now, while the road appears to be built on an old train track, the only documented railroad ran slightly north of the location. Now, this road is supposedly where all kinds of horrible things happened back in the 1890s, and according to some locals, at the creek that runs to Lake Apopka, you can hear the loud screams in the woods. However, when you get closer, they move farther away. The screams are said to be that of the train crew that died. However, skeptics believe this is actually sound that is being reflected reported from another place. According to a local, Michelle, she said, I quote, "My cousin went to Monteverde Academy and heard about this road that runs off 455 that used to be a railroad bed. And they say that if you go down there at night you can hear ghostly sounds and see eerie shadows of people walking on the road. I don't know for sure about this because I never went there, so it is just what I heard." Coming in at number 3, I-4 Dead Zone. Interstate 4 is a highway in Florida that spans 132 miles, with it running from Tampa all the way to Daytona Beach. Now, the interstate is frequented daily by folks heading to work and those on their way to Disney World. Now, while it is a popular highway, it is also another nickname for it, the Dead Zone, an area where folks need to be particularly careful. This area of the highway has been the location of many accidents, electronic malfunctions, as well as supposed ghost sightings. So why exactly is this spot so dangerous and filled with so much paranormal activity? Well, this is because this quarter mile of highway was built over a gravesite, and as we know from movies, a disturbed gravesite means bad news bears. It means you're in for a nasty surprise. It means you're gonna die. Don't believe it? Well, oddly enough, on the very first day the new interstate was opened, a tractor trailer carrying frozen goods lost control and crashed directly above the disturbed graves of people who had died from yellow fever. It is believed that around 1,500 to 2,000 accidents have occurred on the highway since 1963, which is a lot. And worse still, many of those accidents resulted in death, and between a 24-month period, there were around 44 car accidents, resulting in approximately 65 people being injured. Some locals fear this area of the highway so much that they actually take a much longer route around it. On top of all of this, back in the 1950s, a young boy was said to have disturbed the graves, and the following night he was killed by a drunk driver. And to add insult to injury, the driver was never caught. Coming in at number 2, we have the Devil's Chair, also known as the Haunted Chair. This is an urban legend hailing from folklore that is attached to a class of funerary or memorial sculpture common throughout the United States during the 19th century. Now, these chairs were known as the mourning chairs for visitors to cemeteries to sit on when visiting loved ones. However, since then cemeteries have provided benches for similar purposes. Once the original purpose of these chairs fell out of fashion, superstition quickly developed in association with sitting in the chair. For example, some young people dare one another to visit the site, most often after dark or at midnight, or in some cases on Halloween. Stories state that if you sit in the chair at these specific times, something awful will happen, with people fearing that they will be punished. In Florida specifically, the Devil's Chair is located in Cassadaga, Florida, and is a graveside bench in the cemetery that borders Cassadaga as well as Lake Helen. According to legend, an unopened can of beer left on the chair will be empty by morning. Now, in some stories the can has already been opened, and in others the liquid is simply gone through the unopened top. On top of that, it is said that the devil will sometimes appear to anyone bold enough to sit in the chair itself. So if you do decide to visit the chair at night and take a seat expecting to meet the devil, just be sure to have a beer in hand ready for him, because it is said that he will be expecting one. As am I, all the time. I would like a beer. Maybe that's why I'm evil. I'm the devil. And finally, coming in at number 1, Legend of the Skunk Ape. Also known as the Swamp Cabbage Man, Swamp Ape, Stink Ape, Florida Bigfoot, and Louisiana Bigfoot, this is a creature that is said to inhabit Florida and is named for its appearance and for its unpleasant odor that is said to accompany it. The ape has supposedly been a part of Florida folklore since the settler period, which is absolutely insane. One of the first reports of the skunk ape in Florida came from the year 1818, when a report spoke of a man-sized monkey or ape raiding stores and stalking fishermen. This became particularly common in the 60s and 70s, with one sighting occurring in 1974 which spoke of a large foul-smelling hairy ape-like creature which was said to run upright on 2 legs in the neighborhood of Dade County, Florida. However, some people were skeptical, including investigator Joe Nickel, who stated that these reports may represent a black bear and that the sightings may in fact be hoaxes or misidentification of wildlife. In terms of appearance, the creature is said to resemble the Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest. However, the skunk ape is said to be shorter in comparison, has long patches of fur on the shoulders and arm, and is often described as a mottled rusty red colour as opposed to the Sasquatch's brown and black coat. Coming in at number 5, we have the Werewolf of Defiance. During the summer of 1972, the people of Defiance claimed they were being terrorized by a werewolf. On July 25, 1972, Ted Davis, a railroad worker, noticed something strange. He saw 2 hairy, huge paws on the ground in front of him. Confused and likely scared, he slowly raised his eyes and saw before him a creature at least 6 feet tall, hunched over and holding a large wooden board. Before Ted had a moment to react, he hit Ted on the shoulder and ran away. Just a few days after, Ted and his colleagues spotted the return of the unknown creature, and again in the next following day there was another report. A panic began to spur through the town and newspapers about the strange sightings. With all the sightings, it was agreed that the werewolf was large and humanoid. There were enough reports that the Defiance, Ohio Police Department had to open an investigation into werewolves in the area. It is even reported in the various newspapers in Ohio. Eventually, after days of looking with no result, the case was closed. Many people thought it was a prank, but during this experience, people were actually afraid that there were either a creature or some individual dressing up and attacking people. The sightings always happened at night, generally by the train tracks. A couple of women said it would try to get into their houses by rattling the doorknobs. The animal was said to be huge, hairy, and dressed in rags. In at number 4 we have Moonville Tunnel. Located in southern Ohio, these haunted tunnels were once used for multiple railroads. The abandoned coal mining town of Moonville near southeastern Ohio was founded in 1856. At its peak, the town was home to about 100 miners and their families. Little remains of the abandoned coal mining town of Moonville except for a few foundations, a nearby cemetery, and an old railroad tunnel. Due to deterioration, the majority of the tunnels were abandoned, with some filled in for safety reasons. Now only a few remain open, one of which is famously known for being haunted. The railroads were the only route to Moonville, but throughout the years many people have died near the tunnel and train tracks. This is due to the fact that the tunnels were so narrow it was not possible for pedestrians to walk alongside the tracks in the tunnel while a train was passing through, which resulted in numerous fatalities. It is said that the Moonville Tunnel is haunted by ghosts of locals who died from being struck by passing trains. Legend has it the ghost of a man who was killed instantly by a train passing through the tunnel wanders along the track bed near the old tunnel at night. One of the most famous deaths at the tunnel comes from a brakeman worker. Around 1859, a brakeman for the railway fell asleep, and sometime during the night he was awakened by the sound of his train leaving the depot. He arose, stumbling onto the train track and falling beneath the wheels of the train. The brakeman never recovered from his injuries, and the ghost of the man is said to be stumbling down the tracks within the tunnel with a lantern in hand, still trying to catch the train before it leaves Moonville Station. This is why most who claim to have sighted the ghost of Moonville Tunnel say that he carries a lantern and is sometimes seen as a hovering orb of light. In at number 3 we have Melon Heads. Melon Heads is the name given to the urban legend of human-like beings that live in the forests of Michigan, Connecticut, and Ohio. The Melon Heads were originally abandoned children that a scientist by the name of Dr. Crow decided to take care of at his facility in Kirtland, Ohio. While the children stayed at the facility, Dr. Crow performed experiments. What got them the name Melon Heads was when Dr. Crow injected chemicals into their brains, which caused their craniums to grow abnormally large. Because of the abnormal growth, they developed hydrocephalus, which caused them to become mentally ill. After years of neglect, the Melon Heads ended Dr. Crow's life and burned down his facility. After the death of the mad scientist Dr. Crow, the Melon Heads decided to inhabit the forests of Crybaby Bridge. To survive, the Melon Heads feast on any animals that they hunted down. Because of their paranoia of society, the Melon Heads ate anyone that spotted them. To keep the Melon Heads cult going, they've kept inbreeding, making the offspring even more raving and paranoid. Legend holds that the Melon Heads reside in Wisner Road in Kirtland and Chardon Township, with locals and bypassers reported seeing and hearing the Melon Heads as they lurk in the forest looking for their next victim. Local lore depicts them as a territorial and angry, responsible for attacks, kidnappings, and theft of pets and livestock for food. An explorer even wrote a book about the first-person encounter with Melon Head. Kelly Topradosian claims that she was exploring the grounds of the then abandoned Felt Mansion and her friends one night when she saw a small human in the distance. They had an unusually large head, but she wasn't scared. Then he started walking towards them. In at number 2 we have Myrtle Hill Cemetery. Residing in Cleveland, Ohio, the Myrtle Hill Cemetery is one mysterious and scary resting place. This legend starts with a 3-foot round granite memorial that pays homage to a witch by the name of Stoskopf. Local legends explain that old lady Stoskopf murdered her family and tossed them in a well. When the townsfolk discovered the grisly truth, they sentenced her to death. When she was buried standing up, and a massive gravestone was placed above her to weigh her spirit down. Though Though that being said, the legend was likely inspired by the real-life slayings carried out by Martha Wise. Martha poisoned her family's water supply and ultimately killed 3 family members, only a mere mile away from where the Witch's Ball stands today. Early on, Wise claimed the devil made her do it, with the Plain Dealer reporting more than 125 witnesses were called to testify to Wise's insanity, stating that sometimes she barked like a dog and frothed at the mouth, that she wandered the woods at night and caught several barns on fire. Wise served most of the rest of her life in Marysville Reformatory, where she died at 89 in 1971. Although she's buried in Marysville, her victims are all buried within a couple of hundred feet of the Stahls spherical monument, which wasn't installed, according to local residents, until at least the early 1940s. Locals say that if you touch the stone at night and it's warm, it means that the witch has escaped and she's on the hunt for her next victim. Many can't help but believe that the cemetery itself is haunted, and out of curiosity, many people visit the cemetery and trespass at night to try to interact with its residents' spirits. And finally, in at number 1, we have Rogue's Hollow. From the tales of a haunted mill and a crybaby bridge to a shaking graveyard and a headless horseman, Rogue's Hollow is known to be one of Ohio's most haunted areas. You can explore the park today, just be sure to stay away after dark, as that's when the ghosts come out to play. Ohio Rogue's Hollow was once a populated mining village, but very few remnants of the coal mining town remain now. The town was actually once a place notorious for outlaws and gangsters to hide out. Shootouts and robberies were common here, and these continued until the early 20th century. In spite of the town's crooked reality and a peculiar tale, creepy things continue to happen here. There have been multiple reports of sounds of a crying baby at night, shaking grounds at a graveyard, and ghost sightings that haunt the abandoned town. The abandoned mines around Rogue's Hollow are full of ghosts of miners who perished there in cave-ins and accidents, with reports of tools being picked up by unseen hands in the black shafts chipping away at veins of coal. Though the entrance to the mine has been permanently blocked, and the walkway near the mine shafts are equally plagued by residents of the spirit world. One old legend that haunts the town is of the Chideston Mill ghost. The ghost was believed to belong to a mill worker who fell into the wheel and was crushed beneath the churning waves. The ghost guarded the area and is filled with jealousy and spite. Because of the negative energy this ghost brings, he supposedly started a fire in the Chideston house when an outsider expressed interest in purchasing it. A more modern legend is the Crybaby Bridge. At the bottom of the hollow, a bridge crosses Silver Creek. According to legend, a car traveling across the bridge slid on ice and plunged into the creek. Its occupants were no longer alive. Today, you can hear the cries being heard from the surrounding woods. There are an endless amount of ghost stories circulating about the old mining town of Rogue's Hollow, with eyewitnesses reported seeing women in frontier dresses, hearing old trains, crying and floating tools, leaving us even more certain in the belief of ghosts and spirits.